And welcome back to Dollars and Dragons. Today I have with me Donovan Frye. If you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, of course. Hi, I'm Don. Donathan Frye is where you'll find me online. Thanks for having me today, Friday. And I work in the tabletop role-playing game industry. I have for a number of years now as a writer and publisher and pro GM, and I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, let's talk about you have kind of an unusual start. In some ways, maybe more traditional in others. I I generally run into a lot of actors and like stage people in TTRPG. I think that's pretty common. But normally not people who do it professionally. More often it's just amateur because that I think that just gets a little more rare for obvious reasons. But let's talk about that. You did it for quite a while though.
Yeah, totally. I do think it's really common. There's a lot of great overlap between comedians and improv and theater folks and tabletop. I went to school to study acting and directing, and I did it professionally. I moved all over the country and did some tours and did regional theater and loved it. For years, loved it. But like a lot of creative industries, theater has its own challenges. And one challenge that I didn't anticipate, despite everybody telling me that it would happen, is you get to a certain age and you age out of marketability. And then later on, maybe you'll age back into marketability. And it wasn't that I was struggling to find work, but I was struggling to find work that paid the bills to the level that I was looking for and gave me a good work-life balance. And so I eventually started to look for other creative endeavors outside of theater, but I did it for about 14 years. I did theater.
I was in the military for 13 years, so I know what a hard transition that is. Like that's a huge jump. But yeah, that's always the rub, isn't it? Like you are always able to like if you're a professional, generally you're able to find enough work, but does it pay enough?
Yeah.
Does it have decent hours for like a normal human being, or is it just only hours that are catered to like 18-year-olds who can commit their entire existence to this, you know?
Yeah, that's totally the case. And especially, for me, most of what I did was dramatic or comedic plays. I did some musical theater, but musical theater wasn't really my specialty or what I was best at and or what I was most interested in, which only further made my niche more niche over time.
What sort of do you want to talk about some of your roles?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did so much. A lot of, when I was younger, I did a lot of Shakespeare. I got cast, when I was straight out of college as Romeo a few times, and then all of a sudden, I was too old to be Romeo. But I did a lot of dramatic plays, and on the directing side, I directed dramatic plays. I ended up getting into directing operas, which I didn't think I would be good at first because it's a totally different genre of theater, but I kind of fell in love with. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin. I did so many plays. I also started writing more and more, and I was part of a playwrights workshop in college that kind of became like my favorite thing in the world, uh, where we would write, direct, produce an original play once a week. And the same people wouldn't do it every single week. That would be too much. But I did a lot, produced a lot of new materials that way, and it kind of gave me the experience of building something from the ground up, from conception to completion with limited resources and limited time and somewhat total creative freedom. And I think that experience probably is why I got into all of the other things, including tabletop, that I did afterwards and sort of set my mentality for how to approach things.
Yeah, I think that's a very good, from the way that you're describing it, it sounds like a really good basis of project management and being able to understand like, hey, we need to keep this moving forward and what do we need to overcome these obstacles that we have at this point in production. And being a director as well, I'm sure really helps with that. Did you have other project management experience that was like directly project management, or was it always like sort of adjacent to it, or there was project management associated with what you were doing, like in theater?
I Not really outside, and I never thought of directing as project management, but of course, like there's a lot of overlap there. I didn't even think about the words project manager or project management until maybe the last few years when I realized one day, like, wow, a lot of what I do is project management. that's exactly what a lot of what I do is. But I didn't have any other hands-on experience, and I've not, I was a bar manager. I bartended on the side, picking up gigs in between shows or when I needed a little extra money. And I enjoyed bartending too, the social aspect of it and the logistical aspect of it, the actual, dealing with patrons and making drinks and all of that was really fun. I'd say bartending has also contributed a lot to my love for running games. I think there's a lot of overlap there too.
Damn, John, you're so fucking cool. Did you, uh, what type of bar was it that you bartended at?
Oh, I worked at a number of different bars. I moved all over the place, so there's always new jobs. But I've worked at, craft cocktail bars and sort of hole in the wall dive bars, which are actually really fun to work at.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, again, I did that until I got more into tabletop. I think the last time I bartended was New Year's Eve on 2019.
Oh, okay, okay.
But I was also, at that point, was much older than most bartenders too. And bartending, while it honestly pays better than theater pays for most folks, was also, there's a glass ceiling there. And I kind of lucked out. I didn't know it was going to happen. But bars shut down because of COVID-19 just a few months later.
Yeah.
And I had hopped out at the right time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's weird for me to think about as well because I think I was, what year was it? It must have been 2000. So I had a stint of bouncing at a bar in
Oh, yeah.
2016. Yeah, I was a bouncer. Um, back when I tried to look more intimidating because I was pretending to be a man. But yeah, so yeah, I did this. It was like a really like not safe place. It was like a so the town itself was like kind of it was a mill town. So and a lot of truckers, a lot of like loggers, that sort of crowd. There was a lot of drugs, and there were dealers, of course, that would come in. And once in a while, there would be like some big event or something. There would be some sort of like incident, I should say. Probably once a week. Maybe, yeah, maybe once a week. At least 2 or 3 times a month. So maybe we'd have like an off week or something. What we found was that they would have different music come in on Saturday nights. That's when I did it. I did it like Friday and Saturday nights. And when they would have like the DJs come in, always fights. When they had like the old like rock cover band come in, no one fights. It was like a weird culture thing. But yeah, so it was, I don't know what it was, but there was just something about it. Is that the crowd was just different. People didn't want to fight if they were listening to like somebody cover the Rolling Stones or whatever, you know?
I can kind of see that though. Do you feel like your experiences bouncing, like, do you ever say, "Hey, I learned how to do this," or "I got better at this, and it serves me well now"? Like, do you find that there's parallels there for you?
No, funny thing, I just regressed, I think, in my skill set. I had a lot of stuff happen, but like I had already been like someone who so I'd been in the Marine Corps, I think, for like 8 years at that point. So, and I was also a martial arts instructor. I did MMA all the time. So like, and I was used to getting beat up by like these professionals in SoCal where I was training, and then I would just go to like bounce at a bar, and then these dudes would just get like they would have a couple and then they would be like, yeah, I'm a hard blue collar working American, I can fight. And they just really did not know how to fight. So it was like there was no like lessons learned. I think the manager and the bartender were like, you're the best bouncer I've ever worked with, because I didn't like black out from the trauma or the stress of like getting into a fight. I know exactly what was happening all the time. But like it was kind of interesting to just deal with people. I remember it's kind of funny in some ways, but also sad, just sort of seeing like the cycle of the same people at the same bar as their regulars. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I think it would be kind of sad in some cases when you could clearly see that people like, you should probably get your life together, you know? So,
Yeah, you definitely see that in bar culture, and that's something that, as a bartender, not just for patrons, but for staff too. That's part of the culture a lot of times. It One of the nice things about getting older later on in the time of my life when I was bartending is I felt like I was better positioned to look out for people and, you know, support them where I could. And that's not
Yeah.
always, you don't always have folks like that, working around you or taking care of you if you're a patron and maybe you're drinking too much, you're there too often, that sort of thing. So that's something I wasn't well positioned to do as a young person, but as I got
Mhm.
older, that's like one little positive thing that I took from it.
Yeah, and also it was a different environment in which I was sort of getting used to dealing with people that I didn't necessarily have any like power over, quote unquote. And I say that in a very loose term because I was just used to the power structure of like the military, and at that time I was
Sure.
like a sergeant. But it was a good introduction to like dealing with people outside of work, I guess, when I was not recruiting kids. But for initially I thought like, hey, maybe I'll find some people who are qualified in the no, there's nobody at the bar that's qualified to join the Marine Corps. But yeah, so I would say that it was interesting also that there's just a lot of just kind of like similar to like the actual play scene. There's so much drama associated with like the bar that
Hmm.
I was blown away by how much drama there was, and it was just like meaningless silly drama too. It was always like dick measuring contests or something like between like two patrons or something, and it was like, why?
Yeah, yeah. You introduce alcohol and money and expectations in a large social setting, and sometimes things go a little wonky socially.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a did you ever have like the cops at your bar? Did it ever
Oh,
get
oh
like real
yeah.
serious? Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I never personally was in any real dangerous situation, but you see things like, knives get pulled and fights
Hmm.
get taken beyond just a shoving match and people or there's an accident, somebody gets hurt, and the ambulance has to come. Some
Yeah.
unfortunate situations, people, people probably don't think about this, but people just like they do at home, people pass away at restaurants and bars,
Hmm.
sometimes non-accident reasons, natural causes, and other things like that. And so, if you work at a place long enough, then you see, the full scale of the human experience, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There was a lot of fights towards the end of me like deciding that hey, I don't need the extra money, and it wasn't very much money. It was like $15 an hour at that point, which was like above minimum wage, but it's like $15 an hour to potentially get shot. I don't know about that.
It's
Like
not exactly hazard pay, yeah.
no, no. But yeah, there was a couple of times where we every time, of course, when you escort somebody out as the bouncer, like they're always trying to fight you. It's like come on, guy, just leave, please. Like we're just gonna walk you out. We're not trying to fight you on the way to the door. We're just like, come on, can you just go? But yeah, it's frustrating, I guess. So I dealt with it, I think, responsibly at the time. But yeah, I would not recommend that job to anyone. There was one guy who had like taken somebody's sister outside because she was getting too drunk and she was starting fights with people. And she told like her brother or someone close to her that she had been manhandled by this bouncer. And I saw what had happened. That's not what happened. Like she was just like picked up because she was tiny and then moved outside, right? Because she was starting fights with people. And then the next day, this guy comes in and hits that bouncer over the back of the head with a nightstick like 6 times, and he had to go to the hospital. That's the type of drama that
Wow.
I'm talking about. Like it was like dumb small town drama that's like you're really gonna go to prison over like your sister getting taken out of the bar. This is
Yeah,
ridiculous.
that's nuts. That's nuts.
Like assault with a deadly weapon. This is what we're doing here. Okay. It was around that time I was just like, yeah, maybe the pay isn't worth it because like it doesn't matter. Like you, at some point, you're gonna trust someone goes behind you. You know what I mean? Like it's just like,
Hmm.
come on. That's ridiculous. But anyway, let's so we took a very big detour into bar culture. Let's talk about you writing comic books and like working in stage theater before you got involved in encounter role play.
Yeah, so my one of my last couple of theater jobs, I was working for regional theater that did a mix of musicals, and then they had comedy nights. They did a lot of different things. And through them, I started working with this opera company, and I'd done a little bit of opera directing before, and they were looking basically for somebody to come in and help them adapt old operas, rewrite them, not the music, but the book, to basically appeal to a younger audience. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. I am kind of that younger audience that doesn't quite get the classicness of opera the same way that some people do, but I get theater. I understand theater, so I started working with that company, and through that process, I realized that writing is something that I hadn't done as much of in the recent years that I was really interested in, and I was looking to get out of theater, try something different, just kind of shake things up a bit. And I had also done game design, mostly I mean, really just as a hobby. But I don't know if you have ever played them. But do you know what a MUD is? Like a
Oh
multi-user
my God,
dungeon?
Don. Oh my God. I played Muds for 15 years.
Yeah, so me too. I played for so long, and I had run a couple and built a couple. I was running one called Atonement, which was a very role
What?
play
Are you
heavy.
serious? You ran Atonement?
Yeah,
I played that.
you played Atonement?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was mine. I created that game. Not
No
myself
shit.
entirely, but it was my game, and that was really fun. And I wanted to do more game design, and somebody who played Atonement, they hired me for a little game design project, and it wasn't much money, but it was like a couple $1,000s, and I was like, instead of just I've been living paycheck to paycheck my entire life, and instead of just like I don't know going on vacation, maybe I reinvest this couple of $1,000s into some art, and I would love to try to write comic books and just kind of experience what that's like because I grew up loving comics. I found out, and a lot of creative industries are challenging. Comic books might be like one of the most, maybe the most challenging and hard to live off of industries. It was really fun, but the amount of money you have to spend on art just to produce a small book that's not going to sell for a lot of money is really, really high. And I was doing that for a while. But I was really enjoying the process of like creating something that's entirely mine, and people are enjoying it. And I, launched a Patreon that basically paid for the art, and I would produce art at the speed that my Patreon allowed me to. So I wasn't going into debt or anything. And it got the attention of, at the time, like maybe 2017, tabletop streaming company, Encounter Roleplay, and they wanted to produce one of my web comics on their website, and pay me a little bit for it. And so I got to know them, and that's kind of how I got to know that streaming tabletop games, actual plays, was a thing. Had never even heard of Twitch before at the time. They asked me to do a show, and I tried it out and found out that it was actually a lot of fun. We did a Call of Cthulhu game, and I played that with the same group for a few years, and that kind of led me into writing fifth edition at first, books for Kickstarters and folks who would hire me as a freelancer, and running games professionally for people. It was a slow, over a couple of years transition before I went kind of full time into it. But that's how I ended up from theater through comics into tabletop.
I'm blown away that I never thought that I would ever have a guest that has worked on it. That's amazing. I only played it for a short while. I played the alpha on the ship, and
I
then
loved Alpha.
yeah,
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 that was my favorite.
yeah, and then I played for a while. Once everyone got to the moon, and
Wow.
then yeah,
I'm
I
amazed.
played
I've
for
never run into anybody in tabletop who's played Atonement. And we had a decent sized player base, but I guess
yeah,
like not a lot of crossover. Yeah, Alpha and the Moon were both. Those were both of my favorite points. We
yeah.
ran that for about 3 years.
Yeah, I unfortunately I only got to play I think altogether because I played for like a couple of months on the ship and then I played for maybe 6 to 9 months on the moon. My main game was like Armageddon, so like
Oh, of course, I
unfortunately.
played Armageddon too.
What?
Yeah, yeah, all the RPIs
When
I
did you play
played.
Armageddon?
I played. On and off a few years between maybe 2007, 2010. I also ran, I don't know if you ever played Shadows of Isildur, but I ran a large chunk of Shadows of Isildur for a while too.
Oh my god. I think I tried it, but I wasn't as into Lord of the Rings at the time. What? Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's when I started playing Armageddon was like 2007. This is wild, Don.
Yeah, that's really random. That's awesome.
Yeah, I actually brought one of the storytellers that I worked with a lot on Armageddon onto Vineyard as a writer. He's fantastic.
That's awesome.
But yeah, he was one of the builders for a while. I will say though that most of the staff were like not good.
It's
Not
tough.
good.
It's tough, and I've definitely been there in that community. Which people who don't know what MUDs are, the text-based online role-playing games that kind of inspired, I guess, MMORPGs back in the day.
Yeah.
They were a big community for a long time, and of course, like people have moved on elsewhere to other gaming communities, mostly from those games. But most of them, because the licenses that you would use for the engines to create them, like the license we use to create Atonement, it disallowed any kind of profit. So you couldn't run a professional game unless you built your own engine from scratch, which, very few people had the resources to do that.
Right.
And so they were all volunteer ran. You couldn't really make any money off of them, and they take an incredible amount of time. I think when I was building Atonement, maybe back in 2008 or 2009, another thing was happening at the same time, and that was like the economic recession in the United States.
Yeah.
And tours, theater tours shut down because people they couldn't afford the gas for the trucks. So everything was kind of shutting down, and I really threw myself into Atonement. But for a while, I was putting in 40 to 60 hours a week creating
Yeah.
and running that game for free. And while creatively, it was a great experience, and I think really made me feel like I could do game design. Obviously it was not sustainable.
No, I'm right there with you. I believe it. I never had I guess the ominous dominus. I never had the blessing to do any storytelling, and thankfully I didn't. I remember the last time I applied to be like a storyteller on Armageddon to like do more. I was rejected, and I was like, "Fuck this! I'm gonna go be a game designer for real." And you know what happened, Don? I opened up my professional GMing business, became one of the top recommended GMs the very next year, and then also kickstarted a book. So all of that energy I was spending on fucking MUDs for like 15 years, Don.
And you step outside and immediately realize, like, oh, you could actually do this. You can actually do
Yeah.
this. And you nailed it on the head too. With volunteer communities like that, it's really hard to create a safe, fair,
Yeah.
positive administration side. So, a lot of volunteer gaming communities have interior problems with their staff that,
Oh, yeah.
unless, you've got a really good group of tight-knit people who only want the best for their community,
Yeah.
which is unfortunately not always the case, they can kind of go sour.
Yeah. Yeah, I had at the, content warning before this, but I've had a lot of horrible things happen to me in Armageddon Mud, like just as a player, bad experience, sort of like adjacent to my experience as a character. Like I had one of my characters be punished by being like contract married down. And then I was asked if I wanted to like do it or whatever, but there was really no choice. And then my character had to marry someone that was animated by the staff. And then we got into this conversation about whether or not my character was going to provide children. And I was like, I don't want to
Yeah, I'm not
go
interested
through
in
that.
that.
Yeah, I don't want to go through that because like it feels like marriage rape because like not only
Hmm.
does like my character really hate this guy, but like I wouldn't enjoy the process. And so they murdered my character, of course, because they were not fulfilling the contract. But it's like shit like that where there's like so much impressed upon like the arbiter power behind closed doors in those sort of volunteer communities that becomes very toxic. And pretty recently, some of those staff members ended up resigning because after a certain amount of time, the abuser on staff that everybody attempted to out and like bring out, finally someone like brought some receipts directly, and all of the minor abuse like over the years and stuff, like in which they in a permanent death game like went out of their way to get my character or other people's characters killed. And it's there's just like there's so much social manipulation going on for these
Hmm.
abusive people to really take advantage of, you don't talk out of character, you don't like coordinate with people, when these staff members see everything. And the game master role or the storyteller role in a system like that where everything's anonymous, it's so easy to abuse it. And they did. And a lot
Yeah.
of that work got overlooked. All of that, the abuse got overlooked because this person produced a lot of work.
And when you're running a game that runs not on any kind of financial motive for the creators, it's really run based on who is present and who is forceful and who does the work. I have like I again not as into the Armageddon community, although I played the game a few times, but I have similar horror stories that I saw as being a staff member on Shadows of Isildur and some other games
Yeah.
from other staff members, and that's why I left those games, and very like outwardly told everybody what I saw behind the scenes, because it made me so uncomfortable how people were treated and how people leveraged their volunteer position to affect abuse other people. I really hated it. That's why I created Atonement, and try to remove some of the constraints, like you mentioned, not being able to chat with other people outside of the game, outside of character, was always just so backwards and harmful to me, that was just the given in that community. And so a lot of those rules, I try to strip away and create something that, Atonement was not it was a deadly game. People died a lot.
Yeah.
It was a horror game, but the hope was that all of that would be supported, the players would be supported, and have a safer community than other places they'd been. That was the goal, at least.
I had a lot of situations, even in game, where I, of course, always played femmes because I was in the closet. Um, but I had a lot of situations in which, like, there would be someone with a higher social status or something, or who could physically or like politically do a lot of harm to my characters, who sort of like put themselves into the position where they would, it would be like sexual assault by coercion or sexual harassment. And it would be those situations where like a Templar or something is telling my character to like do this or that, and to deny a Templar for anything usually means death, and that's how the setting
Hmm.
is written. So it's like I got into so many situations where I actually filed like complaints about, some characters, like they're straight up sexually harassing my character. Like there's no way around this. Like this is literally just sexual harassment. Like I don't want to run this storyline. Like maybe my character has like a romance at some point, but yeah, I don't know. It was awkward. It was weird. I didn't like it. I had a lot of bad experiences. And it became like a kind of a Stockholm syndrome, I think, for me, because it was like my only outlet to be a woman for so long. But coming out of the closet totally cured me of that, honestly, because
That's
when
amazing.
I because when I stopped, like when I finally hit my breaking point with those characters, I was like, when I finally got abused again, and then like they purposefully killed my character because a staff member was mad at me for something that I said out of the game, and I finally like filed my complaint. And I was like, I'm not coming back, and then I didn't. Like, and then like not even 2 months later, I'm just like, fuck, I'm trans. Because I actually had to dwell and sit in my own body and think of myself how I naturally want to be. Whereas previously I had used muds to like transport myself, and like it was like a band-aid for so many years for my experience as a woman. So and that's
Well,
honest, yeah.
I'm sorry you had to go through dealing with that kind of abuse in those communities just to have that experience, though. It's a terrible thing, and it makes me, I know a lot of games that had similar problems and similar people, and I've heard a lot of stories like that. I think Tabletop used to have, probably more than now, but it still happens now, similar stories, but with those text-based games, those MUDs, like you said,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of Stockholm syndrome. It's a little bit harder to step away. And if you're in a situation where you can't even like speak out of character and say, I'm not okay with this, then there's a problem.
Yeah. And the administrators or the people running the game, the staff, they would say, yeah, you can talk out of character or whatever to report or whatever, or like not consent for something. But if you didn't consent for like a torture scene or something, then that pretty much just said it was okay to kill your character,
Hmm.
because that's the next step. Is you deny the torture, then if you deny the torture, then like you're just allowing them to take the next mechanical escalation that they can. In which case, it was like type kill Amos or whatever your name is,
Yeah.
and like it's just, I don't know. It was such an abusive. Like it was definitely the what's that prison guard experiment? That's not Stockholm, but
Oh, I know the one you're talking about.
it was that was the culture of the
Yeah.
game. It was very disturbing. But yeah, doing great sense.
I'm glad you're here now. Yeah, and I feel the same way. Like getting involved more in tabletop and away from that, I realized for so many reasons that it's just better. You know, there's something
Yeah.
to be said, I guess, about the creativeness of a persistent world that you can be a part of at any time. I like that. I think that part of it's cool. It's just it was never safe. It was never sustainable. And I'm not even sure if achieving that would be possible on a large scale.
Yeah, it still takes that the separation of that suspension of disbelief, because a lot of the world would be not animated. A lot of the world would just be like virtual, right? So it's
Hmm.
like you're still suspending your disbelief just like you would at a tabletop game, really. It's just
Totally.
that you could log in at any time and play. So it feels different to people because they can sort of escape a little bit more regularly. So it can become an issue, and it was an issue for me, but for different reasons. So, but yeah, it's weird. Okay, we're gonna stop talking about MUDs. Let's move on.
Sure.
So your professional GM work. We're talking about you sort of moving from comic books. You did a little bit of so you did stage theater. You did some actual plays with Encounter Role Play. And then how did your professional GM work sort of build? I know you're still on Patreon and you do some PayPal. You're not on Start Playing Games, right?
No, no, I'm not. And when I started, the Roll20 kind of had a like a forum for professional GMs, but there wasn't really a platform for it. And so I don't know how typical my start to it all was, but I was doing actual plays. I was pretty big into the actual play scene at the time. You're talking like 2018, 2019, 2020, especially those years. And I was running a game, a Dragonlance campaign that a lot of folks really loved, and we had a great community for called May Black Roses Bloom. And I had, it was an awesome cast. It was a great experience, and I love Dragonlance, so I was excited to do it. But to deal with donations through Twitch rather than what was the standard at the time for a lot of channels, which was donate and a player, gets a re-roll, or a lot of them were doing like this. The player has to roll on a wild magic table, which could mean like I donate, $5 to the game, and all of a sudden your player has a mushroom grow out of their head, and it happens in a really dramatic moment where they're talking to their long lost sister that they've been searching for the entire. Like it could be very very disruptive, I guess, is what I'm saying. So instead, and because a lot of the people who were watching were fans of Dragonlance, but there was no, at the time, Dragonlance for 5th edition, I thought that instead we'd allow donations for anyone who might want to play as a guest star for an episode. And I didn't know if anyone would want to do it or not. They did, and I would work with them, outside of the game, in between games, on their character, and try to make sure that their story was really cool and would fit in with what was going on with the game, like really customize that experience for them. And over time, there were so many people signing up for that that we had to kind of raise the prices, thinking like, we can't we can't service all these people, but we want to give them a good experience. but still people were signing up for it and having a great experience. And I really kind of fell in love with, like, I guess the onboarding process of bringing people that I'd never played with into a world that I was really invested in and giving them a great experience. And through that, because I saw how that went, I decided to try to open up a private game. My first one was a Dark Sun adaptation of Fifth Edition, and Dark Sun is actually very similar to Armageddon,
Mm-hmm.
but I very much wanted to kind of adjust the problematic elements of Dark Sun and create something that I felt spoke towards the core parts of it that I really loved. And there's also no real Dark Sun, official Dark Sun adaptation for fifth edition. And I loved the process of like taking an IP that I have an investment in that I care about a lot and putting a little my own spin to it, making it more modern, bringing it to fifth edition. That was a fun process for me. So my first, private professional game was Dark Sun, and those seats filled up. And then, less than a year later, COVID-19 happened and people were stuck at home. And I had a group reach out to me that, they wanted to socialize, but they couldn't see each other in person anymore. So they were hoping I would, they'd seen May Black Roses Bloom. They were hoping I might run a game for them. And so we played a short campaign, and none of them had ever played D&D before. So I taught them the game, and then we talked about, what they wanted to do long term. And they were really interested in Theros, which had recently come out. And I really love Theros. The setting of Theros is one of my favorite things that 5th edition's done. And so I started a Theros game for them that I'm still running today. And with those two games, I kind of realized that I think people are very interested in, a safe, curated community with high quality games that they can rely on. They know it's going to happen, and everybody's invested in the story and their characters. And it allowed me, by going private and focusing more on that and less on streaming, without having to worry about all the production of streaming and the logistics of getting people's schedules to work together for streaming. I kind of gave me the opportunity to build more of the worlds and the game design that I love doing. It let me, the money of it allowed me to invest the time into making the games more of what I wanted them to be, in my imagination. And I loved that. And so I started doing more and more of those while I was also working with publishers and writing on the side. And I just kind of grew into, it's not my only job, but it's my core job is running games for folks.
I think that's really interesting. I do love Dark Sun for some elements, but then of course like there's a lot of problematic stuff.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
I talked with I'm actually about just to release this podcast. If you are curious to hear more about Dark Sun, I actually talked to Robert Aducci.
Oh yeah, I
Who
love Robert.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm actually releasing that this week sometime whenever I get around to it. Listeners, it'll be out there. Um, but yeah, so there was a lot of stuff about like at least my experience. Like I played a Dark Sun game in fifth edition since. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff about the setting that can be really cool. I think that my major problem really is just like how do you how do you without making it incredibly problematic, how do you play a slavery dominated economy? That's
Hmm.
it's just like why do that? And then also what sort of benefit are we gaining here to tell a good story that we couldn't tell from like a similar story that did not have slavery in it, you know? It feels like
Yeah. It,
yeah.
that's I've got to imagine that's why Wizards of the Coast has not released, Dark Sun, a new edition of Dark Sun for fifth edition, despite the fact that it remains a pretty popular.
Yeah.
Because that's the big problem. And I know for my games, the campaigns I ran altogether 103 sessions of Dark Sun, which was a few, interconnected campaigns in different parts of the world. But we spent a lot of that time away from the sort of slavery driven central area around Tyr of the setting, exploring kind of the wild parts of the world. And, through session zeros and, safety and tools, lines and bales and whatnot, stars and wishes, able to determine, what people are most interested in, and what they weren't okay with. So we were able to step away from that element of the world and go kind of explore the wide world, which is very wilderness, in a lot of places. And the setting, I ran a stream. Part of my campaign was streamed, and it was set in the city state of Balak. Really, really compelling. A lot of it's really compelling and interesting, but canonically, it still has slavery, which was something we were not going to do in our campaign, and so we changed it. It was still dark, it was still gritty, but those things we did not explore in our campaign. But for an official module for Wizards of the Coast, they couldn't make, I don't think they could make anybody happy. If they released Dark Sun and took
Yeah,
out those problematic elements, they wouldn't make people happy. And if they released it with those elements, they would be doing a lot of harm. So that's why I
yeah.
don't think we'll ever see Dark Sun again.
Yeah, there's a lot of I was talking about this with Robert, and one of the most interesting stories that's like really core to Dark Sun is like the ecology and like the eco-terrorism, and
Mm-hmm.
like those sort of storylines where you have these magic users, that these defilers that literally strip the lifeblood of everything around them in order to fuel their magic. And in theory, it makes them like more powerful that way. And they're like literally a leech upon the planet. So I think that's super cool.
Me
Um,
too.
but like, if you could just take that and put that in a different setting, that would be
But you
great.
totally can, because it's such an easy, that's
Yeah.
an easy thing to translate. Yeah, you could put it into a different setting. I think, if you talk to the original, and Robert probably mentioned this, but if you talk to the original designers and writers of Dark Sun, there's a lot of punk ideas, a lot of anti-establishment ideas that they
Yeah.
had, like slavery is meant to be overthrown, and overuse of technology, aka magic, as having a negative long-term effect on our climate, that when Dark Sun came out might have seemed, to them kind of subversive. But the way it's presented obviously is problematic, especially some of the elements geared towards race and geared towards slavery that just,
Yeah.
they don't really, they're harmful. And they're so core, like you said, it's so core to the setting that you're kind of better off just taking the stuff you like and putting
Hmm.
it elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah. And, speaking as someone who's pretty much played in every problematic setting or problematic situation in Dark Sun, because I played Armageddon Mud, which was basically more or less a carbon copy of Dark Sun. I perhaps didn't have the perspective or like the education back then, but like looking back on it, I'm just like cringing, thinking about like all these things that now I'm a little bit more educated about. But
Same. Me too.
yeah, yeah. It's like it's just one of those things where it's like this is why we need diverse writing teams and consultants, because
Hmm.
like stuff like that would absolutely be a blind spot, because if you're building, it's like the Bloodsport problem, right? It's like, you seen Bloodsport?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So, love the movie. Terrible Orientalist. Like it's absolutely awful. But it's just like it's the encapsulation of like the 1980s like Orientalism, and then in addition to that, you're basically just drawing from memory all the things that you thought was cool from different media, which is actually the real story. I don't know if you know the real story about that, but
I
the
don't.
guy the guy who made the script, who like went to a reporter about the Kumite, was a bullshit artist, and had this entire career built up around like being a bullshit artist. And he like created a fake gym that taught ninjutsu, and yeah, and he literally just like came out of the fucking woods to talk to this reporter, having just returned from the Kumite with some fucking trophy that he bought like at a trophy store or something. And like, so that's the real story of Bloodsport. But it got turned into a movie, and you'll see it like the end. It says based on true events. It
That's
was
wild.
not, yeah, but like it was just like some fucking white guy in California's. I think it's California. Of course, because it's like near LA, but some white guy's like very broad stroke Orientalist like vision of like what they imagine it is to be like this super powerful warrior inspired by these like Bruce Lee movies or whatever. So
Yeah, I like When it comes to looking back at things now, it's only probably through becoming more involved with the tabletop communities online, honestly, that I realized, how much I didn't know about storytelling and games and other people and, what stories are saying without, you realizing that's what they're saying. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, the last few years, there's definitely, and I suspect this is probably true for most people, and look back and think about some of the games that I played or movies that I watched or communities that I was a part of. Like, wow, yeah, that's pretty cringe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, yeah, for sure. I'm just thinking about all the things. That's like that's like the first season of The Office, and then I go back to watch it now, I'm just like, "Oh god, no,
It's
not
so
this
painful,
scene.
right?
Not this scene. This is so oh god."
uh,
Oh,
it's good
okay.
that it's only 6 episodes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about solo adventures.
Sure.
What inspired you to write these solo adventures? You did one for that was sort of attached to, or I guess you say, would it be like the product line for Descent to Avernus, and then you did one
Mm.
for the new Dragonlance adventure. Let's talk about them. How did they come about, and why do you think they're so? I mean, probably they're written well, right?
I
That's
hope
why
so,
they might
yeah.
be a bestseller. But like, what other elements do you think really speaks to the audience that caused them to sell so well?
Yeah, of course. So I don't self-publish a lot, and part of the reason that I don't do that is I don't really I understand the industry in terms of pretty well, like in terms of print and distribution and marketing and all of those things. But that stuff's not fun for me, and it can be very time consuming. And so if I self-publish a project, tabletop project, I want to do it because I'm excited about that project and because I believe that it's a good idea with good timing that'll do well so that my time is rewarded. And so Kiana Shaw and we've been streaming tabletop together, as players in the same group, and she was in my May Black Roses Bloom campaign. So we became pretty good friends, and I knew that she had been self-publishing some games um, online herself and was interested in narrative design. And we were chatting, and I grew up, one of the many like nerdy things that I grew up with were these game books, similar to like Choose Your Own Adventure, but maybe more narratively, mechanically complex. And I knew that there were way more players interested in D&D and other tabletop games than there were, seats at the table, games available. And I wanted to create something initially, and my pitch to Keanu was basically like, Descent into Avernus looks really cool. People are really excited about it. There's a lot of buzz about that particular book at the time, and we know it's coming out in this time frame. I was talking to her about loving multiple choice games, choose your own adventure games, narrative design, and kind of pitched the idea of doing a solo game that would be kind of like that, but a little more narratively complex and mechanically complex and would fit right into the D&D and would be a really good game for a first-time player who was like, I hear everybody talking about D&D, but I'm kind of nervous about joining a game. I don't really know how the rules work or how to play it. Wanted to create something that was accessible to new players, but unique to other players, and release it at the exact same time that Descent into Avernus was releasing. And so to pull that off, we decided to kind of make a prequel to their adventure. And we knew a good deal about their adventure from, some of the interviews we'd seen online. We knew what the storyline would kind of revolve around, and they were canonical characters that had a history in D&D, so we kind of knew that history. And so we took a stab at it, and we wrote an adventure that could be played alone, but we created a rule set so you could also scale it up and play it with a group. You could play it with or without a dungeon master. And then on release day of Descent into Avernus, I got the book from D&D Beyond. I get all the D&D books for my private campaigns. And I did a quick read through and said, okay, here are the things we got wrong, or here's where we can make our adventure very easily better fit into what they're already doing, so that it would be a good companion to their book, a good prequel to their book. You could play the adventure's called To Hell and Back Again. You could play To Hell and Back Again. It would be an additive experience if you took your characters into their larger campaign afterwards. And we released it on the same day. And I think, the reasons why they've done well, the new book is called The Test of High Sorcery, and it's for Dragonlance. And again, we released it at the same time that they released the recent Dragonlance campaign, is because we thought we could write something that would be additive to what they were doing. It would make the experience of playing the full book better, but also work alone. That we would have the benefit of Wizards of the Coast already marketing that storyline at the same time, that we were excited about those adventures, and that you could play them in a lot of different ways, including alone. There's not a lot of books that are released or self-published that way, especially for D&D. So on DM's Guild, there are other solo adventures, but there's not a ton of them, and none of them were taking the sort of narrative approach that we were taking at the time. So the first one was kind of a shot in the dark. I thought it might do well, but it's never slowed down. Like my sales for To Hell and Back Again, every single month, it's very consistent and has been now for like 4 years, which is, I think it speaks to the possibilities for a good solo adventure released on that platform. And with the Test of High Sorcery, we kind of went bigger, because we knew what we were doing a little bit more. And I don't know how familiar you are with Dragonlance and the Test of High Sorcery, but in Dragonlance, it's a big part of Mage. They're becoming part of the conclave of High Sorcery, requires them undergoing this really crazy test. And it has to be personal to that mage. The challenges you overcome, it draws upon your character's backstory and history, so that no two mages would ever take the same test. And while you can take it with friends, generally, a lot of times it's taken alone, which is not the most fun thing to play at a table, to watch one character run through a series of harrowing tests that you're not directly involved with, or where you're just kind of the support character. So it felt like nobody's ever published an adventure for the Test of High Sorcery because it is so personal to the character. It felt like something that a solo adventure could speak to uniquely well. And we didn't know if they would include. There is a little thing that you can do to sort of take the test in WotC's official book, but it's not very in depth. So we were kind of taking another stab in the dark that we weren't creating something that the new Dragonlance book was already doing, and we were kind of right that what we did was additive, and I think maybe that's why they've done pretty well.
Yeah,
and they're just kind of unique.
Yeah, I really like the idea because all of that really, I think, summarizes, in my opinion, to really like accessibility, and you're able to basically give that as a GM, even if you're not a player. You could give that to one of your players and say, "Hey, this is part of your backstory. I just need you to play through this," and then you'll come out the other end, and then you'll know a lot more about your character. And I think that's probably why, because you could end up giving this to a player has a reason to buy it, and a GM has a reason to buy it, and there are very few products like that.
Yeah, and we do a survey in the back of both books. There's a little link because they're digital products only. There's a little link to a survey, so we get to see, for the people who fill it out, what their outcomes were, what decisions they made, what experience. And it's a wide range that we see, which is pretty cool. And one of the things that both books do is the epilogue at the end of the books. You collect, they're called traits. They're basically phrases like stole the Necronomicon. That's not one of them, but could be one of them, right? And at the back of the book, there's a little blurb for every single trait that gives you future hooks for future adventures, so that if you were to take this to your GM, you're encouraged to say, hey, here's some traits that I got from running this. Here's some, outcomes for my character in case this is something you want to use. And so hopefully it ties the solo experience back into a group experience when possible.
I guess I'm going to include the links in the show notes, so you can go check them out if you want.
Thank you.
Well, excuse me. I'm playing through Dragonlance right now, so I ended up picking I'm playing a Squire of Solamnia.
Cool.
But I'm like, I'm not reading too much about Dragonlance because I'm not trying to spoil myself. So I'm right I'm riding the lightning like everywhere I look. Like every soon as I see something Dragonlance, I'm like left turn. Like
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, Dragonlance is one of those settings. It's like a nostalgia setting for me. I grew up with it and reading the
yeah,
novels when I was a kid and whatnot. And it has its own problems,
yeah.
honestly, for sure. But I've always kind of loved it and had a soft spot for it. So it's cool to see people, people experience it for the first time. I wasn't sure that they were going to bring it back, and it's kind of cool that people are getting to, find out. I'm not going to ruin anything, but there's lots of twists and turns and things that make it unique. So that's really cool that you're getting to experience it.
Yeah, yeah, thus far we're only at like chat the second part of the game right now. We're like 10 sessions in. But yeah, it's been great. I think it's really well designed.
Me too.
And I think the adventure writers did a really great job with it. I've been working or I chatted with Brian Cortijo, who wrote the Caliban part of the book, and I'm going through that part right now. So I'm very eager to like talk to Brian about that once I finish that part. But yeah, I think it's been wonderful. And one of the things that I found that has been improved over some of these Wizards products has been there used to be like a very segmented sort of feeling to the adventures because they would like partition these things out and then they wouldn't let writers talk to each other. But I suppose
Hmm.
nowadays that they actually do allow you to see what the guy next door is doing. So I think it really shows in Dragonlance because of the way that they've sort of constructed that adventure. But yeah, so let's talk about design work. So Fallout, how did you start getting involved with Modifius, and what can you tell me about that, especially like the Winter of Adam?
Sure. I think a lot of people, when they start working with or for publishers, there's a couple approaches people take. Some people submit something and try to get attention that way. Or if there's an open call, submit, a pitch during an open call. A lot of times, though, honestly, it comes down to like who to get at least to get started. And for me, when I was fairly, I was still establishing myself. I had done a couple of Kickstarter projects for folks, but I hadn't done a whole lot. I got asked through my friend Charlie, who was part of the Encounter Roleplay streaming community, to play with her friends on a Game of Thrones campaign. And I really love Game of Thrones. I'd never played this system before, but like the idea, all the political backstabbing and the fact that it's like low magic and, kind of a more grounded fantasy world really appealed to me. And it was this British group of people that I hadn't met before. And we still play that campaign today. So we've been playing Game of Thrones on stream, just kind of casually as friends for like 4 years now. And Samantha Webb was the GM, and several of the other folks involved were also employees for Modifius. And I'd kind of shared, what I was doing elsewhere, and they'd seen May Black Roses Bloom and my first solo adventure that I'd released and my first campaign book that I'd done. And Samantha asked me to write an adventure for Achtung Cthulhu, which
Mm-hmm.
is their like, Cthulhu meets World War II pulp action military kind of game that Modifius publishes. And I pitched them. It was basically because I don't know a lot about World War II. I'm not an expert on World War II, and I don't know. It's a very British game. Like a lot of it's set with British factions and whatnot. That I honestly am not very familiar with that either. And so I pitched them an adventure that was sort of like a League of Their Own meets Cthulhu, where the characters were like on leave and back in America. And it's the 4th of July, and it's an exhibition game between two All American women's baseball teams. And President Roosevelt is in the audience. He's at the game. And I did know a fair amount about baseball and kind of the history of women's baseball during World War II. And I thought that would, like the pre-made characters, you could play either somebody who's on leave, or you could actually play one of the women baseball players during the game. And I pitched this adventure and wrote this adventure for them called Seventh Inning Slaughter, where the baseball game gets played out. And if you're a baseball player, then you actually get involved with the game. There's some mechanics there. But over the course of 7 innings, this mystery sort of involves, and you've got a German sorcerer who's infiltrated the stadium and is going to pull off this ritual, and then things just go crazy during the 7th inning stretch. And it probably wasn't like any other adventure they had ever published for Octoon Cthulhu, or maybe will ever publish since, but they really enjoyed it. And so they asked me to write the core adventure for Fallout. And I really like the Fallout universe. I think it's really fun and unique, and I think it's really well suited for tabletop because it's so distinct and it leans into both drama and the sort of wackiness. It also, has just a ton of material, that you can draw from. And it allows you to reimagine the Fallout setting pretty much anywhere you want. So I was really interested in that. And so I wrote the adventure. They asked me, they said, this is the kind of adventure, this is the story we want to tell for the core rule book. And then they let me pitch them the adventure for the starter set, which is a little more extended. It's like a mini campaign. And after those two adventures, they really wanted to expand the system and kind of relaunch it with a big campaign book. So they asked me if I would pitch them a full campaign book that was a rules expansion and a big story. But they didn't give me any constraints, so they let me kind of build my own team, and I had to pitch to them, and then I had to pitch to Bethesda the full story. But I got to control all the project management and all the development myself. They kind of trusted me with a lot, but I'd written a few things for them before that, so I think that kind of built confidence that I'd be able to come through for them before taking on Winter of Adam. That's kind of the process of how I got there. And again, without the fact that I randomly said, yeah, I'll play with these people that I don't know, and playing in a Game of Thrones campaign and meeting the Modifius team that way, I don't think that our paths might not ever have crossed otherwise. I probably wouldn't have gotten those jobs.
Yeah, there's a weird relationship sometimes between like publishers and the actual play scene. I guess not weird, but like I guess in other industries there isn't as much crossover between like performers and writers, would you say, or is it that way in theater as well?
Uh, well, in theater, it's a very collaborative environment. And it's going to vary, from theater to theater. Like if you're a playwright, then it's different. If you're writing a play that's being premiered for the first time, then you're very involved with the director and maybe very involved with the cast, or you've written, The Glass Menagerie and it's been done a million times. Then obviously you're not going to be directly involved with all those productions. So I do think that tabletop does have a closer relationship, especially as time's gone on, between content creators, I guess. I kind of balk at that word, but that's the word that makes sense, and publishers. Maybe that's the same in video games. I bet it is to an extent, because streaming, video games are a huge part of the streaming community, but I can't be sure about that. But yeah, I think Modifius has always been interested in the streaming community. I think they were one of the first publishers to kind of produce their own shows on their channel, and support shows that run their games, and promote shows that run their games. They started that pretty early, before a lot of other companies were doing that, which is probably a good thing for them, honestly. And that is kind of how I met them.
Yeah, I think I just I have my own opinion now, I guess, about actual plays, and that I don't know. Personally, as a publisher, like for me at my current like situation, I find it really hard to justify paying for an actual play, because like what I really need is for people to buy books, not for people to like watch the actual play. So it's like that's for me to run an actual play, I would want to pay people well enough, I would want to for it to be at least worth the effort. And to be respectable pay and stuff. And if I just one-to-one that with like running ads in order to sell books, there's no comparison. Ads wins every time. Like actual plays don't actually push books. So I'm under the really strong impression that like maybe if you have like a greater or a broader strategy where you're building your branding around running these games and building up a community that way, I think that can happen, and I think that's important. But that's not the marketing budget that 90% or more publishers should probably have at this point. Because
I
if
totally
like,
agree.
yeah, it's like Modifius can afford it, and so can like Free League or whatever. But like, they can also afford like licenses from like movies and stuff. So like,
Hmm.
so it's like,
It's not a direct comparison. Yeah.
that's not me. Like,
Yeah. I
so
I
yeah,
I spent time, working, producing actual plays, especially around 2020. I was doing that more than I was running private games still, and at a time where, like, for then, I was able to pay the casts what were good rates, and that was really important to me. But part of that process was also following the ROI and proving that any sponsorships and whatnot were financially worth it, for those companies. And part of the reason I kind of have backed out of that over time is because I don't think most times the ROI is there. The return on investment is there for companies. I suspect that a lot of publishers are seeing that and adjusting their strategies. I don't know the specific deals that Modifius works out for the streams that they support. Sometimes it might just be like free product, um, which,
hmm
isn't without value. As long as everybody agrees to it and everybody's happy with it, then I get that. But in terms of like professional streaming actual plays, there's a very small window of opportunity for a relatively small group of people to actually make a sustainable living that way. And for companies to benefit. Yeah, I think maybe if you're like Wizards of the Coast or somebody like that, just the brand awareness, not that Wizards doesn't need the brand awareness anymore. The brand
right,
awareness, maybe it's helpful, just to
yeah.
get people to realize that Fallout, the game, the role playing game, actually exists. But yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I think it's a tough industry, actual plays.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like when I'm looking at what does it cost me to get a pay-per-click ad for someone to potentially buy my book or whatever. So I can get ads down to anywhere from like 5 to 9 cents a click. Are we getting that from actual plays? Fuck no. Like there's no way. You just don't have there's not enough of an audience unless you're like, you're running like six-figure viewing audience, right? It's one of those things where it actually makes more sense in some ways. And there's a lot of people who had a problem with because of whatever, they're just upsetty spaghetti. But there was recently, amongst the other 90 things that people are upset about in the TTRPG actual play scene, I feel like there's more drama. Just to segue real quick, I feel like there's more drama in the actual play scene than there is actual content, and there's a lot of fucking content, Don. So I
Yeah,
don't
I know.
know. Like it's like, oh my god. But people were upsetty spaghetti about like non D&D players making an actual play, and they were blowing up because they had a huge audience already. Like,
Hmm.
and that's something that person, that group, that company, that brand, whatever, built up over time, and they earned that. So it's like you have all these people who think that they can perhaps build up a brand entirely on actual plays, and I just don't think that's a good model. I don't think that's possible because you're talking about monopolizing someone's time for 4 hours a week,
And
even 2 hours a week. That's a lot of time.
especially if you're trying to run on a model that uses multiple shows,
Yeah.
encounter role play early on, and it's part of it's because it's way more saturated. There's way more content now than there ever was. But encounter role play was one of the first big streaming groups for actual plays, and I know that it was a company, and the guy who owned the company definitely made profit. He sold his company in the end. And they were at their peak, running 10 to 14 shows a week, and they had sponsorships for most of those shows. But I can't imagine, I think companies at the time were excited to invest into a new marketing angle. But
hmm
especially as the number of actual plays grew, there's just not enough money to go around, in my opinion. So wanting to make a career out of actual plays, it's kind of like you've kind of got like lottery odds a little bit,
hmm
and B, just like which a problem in video games. It's a problem in tabletop publishing, tabletop books too. There's sort of an arms race in terms of scale of production quality too. And so now to really be able to produce a high level series, how much do I have to invest? Do I need an in-person studio where we all live in the same place, and we have a set and we have good lights and we have a producer running the show, or maybe multiple producers running the show? Do I need an editor to cut down our actual play video into the most entertaining, 2 hours or an hour and a half or however long you want to make that episode? All of that's really, really expensive if you're paying everybody appropriately. And so, A, I need money to invest and time to invest, and B, I kind of have to get lucky. And C, if I don't already have an audience, then I'm kind of, swimming against the tide. It's very challenging, and I don't say any of that to deter anyone from doing actual plays, because I've had a lot of fun doing them, and I think I'm lucky in that I can say that actual plays contributed to me being able to be full time in what I do now. They definitely helped, because I was in the right place at the right time, maybe. But I think now the shift of expectations, I would always encourage people to not put all their eggs in that basket. And if they do it because creatively it's fulfilling to them and they have the time and the space to commit to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people, like, if you're going to get involved in APs, like, just don't expect it to be regular income, because it's never going to be regular income.
Mm.
Even like the top people who are doing 6 shows a week or whatever, like, that's not sustainable long term, because people are going to, like you said, like, publishers are going to wonder, like, where's my ROI?
Mm.
And
And
there's
most
gaps in
most of
shows.
those shows are like just a few episodes too, right? Like that's not a
Yeah.
long-term job. And those
Hmm.
jobs, getting them consistently is really hard.
Yeah, and that's because it's not a sustainable there's not a sustainable, like, model for people to do 100 episode actual play for a product. It's like, if you're pushing a product, it's like, let's do 1 to 3 episodes or 1 to 6 at most.
Hmm.
And because that's where I can see the ROI, where they're not paid off. And I say this as a person who's, like, arranged actual plays. I've, like, produced, and I've, like, I've run them. I've been the showrunner, been the GM, I've been a player and producer. Like, I've done a lot. I've done quite a few shows. I think it's like 6 or something. I forget. The Vineyard started as a show.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah, the Vineyard was taken from one of my shows that I. It was my first homebrew campaign, and that book got developed out of that material. So it's like, that I produced for these players, and I think there's a lot of valuable things to it. But, like, I think some people just have some expectation that, like, it's going to continue to grow, when the reality is, like, everything follows the money, everything follows the advertisers. So who's going to advertise on your actual play? And if you can't answer me who is going to get a return on advertisement for whatever it is that you're doing, then you don't have a show long term. And that's
Yeah.
at least a paying show long term, because that's the reality of it. Like, someone has to run commercials. Someone has to get paid here. Who's going to do it?
Hmm. And I think, if the entire cast and everybody involved in a project is on the same page that they're doing this, for fun or for creative purposes, and they're okay with not getting paid or not getting paid, a living wage, and then at that point, it's a hobby project. People are doing it out of the passion of their heart. And of course, like, that's awesome if everybody's on the same page about that. Nobody's being taken advantage of. Nobody's being asked to do unpaid labor beyond, just enjoying the game and being there. So I think those kinds of projects are great. And maybe for a pro GM, it's good to have actual plays, especially if you can create an idea that penetrates and people watch it. At least the kinds of people you hope to reach watch it and they
Yeah.
enjoy it. To have an example online of like, well, this is what I'm like as a GM. Probably really nice to have. For me, and I don't have like a marketing platform like Start Playing Games, just because I built it, before then, and I kind of have my own thing. The primary way people initially found me was through watching me run games on YouTube, and I wasn't I wasn't Critical Role or anybody like that, but that is how most people initially found me and wanted to play games with me. And I haven't done as many actual plays recently, so I maybe rely more on word of mouth now. But I think that was really valuable for me. Financially sustainable, no. but doing what I do now, it's definitely helped.
Yeah, I think it's a good experience when you're a hobbyist and you're trying to figure out if you're going to go into like the amateur and the professional markets, like because there's a perspective that you need to have if you're going to like take something valuable out of that. And when I went into actual plays, I was fully committed to saying I'm going to figure out if I want to do this for a living. And I found out very quickly after I was learning editing and I learned how to make YouTube videos and I learned everything else that went along with it, like GMing. I learned how to GM for actual plays. That it's really there's not a long tail on buying. Most money that I put into my shows to make them look really good and pay people properly, they just didn't really result in anything. I think on the hard discussion is like we ran a great game. It was really fun, but like how much do I need to pump into this in order to get any sort of growth or any sort of like product sold or anything like that? And unfortunately, it's a shit ton.
Yeah,
It's a shit ton. So like
and
you
time
have
too. The amount
yeah.
of time it takes to produce a show is way more than it takes to run a great game that's not
Mhm.
streamed.
Absolutely, yeah. That's why I went off stream. It's like as soon as I realized when I started part-time GMing, I realized like, holy shit, I'm making like more than my actual job. Like just running games, and then I quit my job like the same week, which was not advised. You should save up before you do that. But yeah, as soon as I realized that, I was just like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing with the actual plays. I'm done with this shit. Like, like I'm over it. Like, as soon as I realized, like, in order to make a living in games and be adjacent to tabletop and then still write and have these sort of professional relationships with a lot of other people, you didn't necessarily have to be running actual plays. I think actual plays are great once in a while, and maybe I'll get back in there once in a while. Like I was a guest a couple of times for Three Black Halflings earlier this year, and they are just really fun to play with. I was very happy to play with them. I had a great time. But yeah, for sure, it's like
I think you mentioned like the business model, and it's just really hard to make that model work for
yeah,
almost everybody. I still do, I still play my Game of Thrones stream with my friends,
yeah,
and I do like if it's like a charity event, then I'm happy to jump in to run a game or play a game. I don't get to play very many games now. I run so many games, so especially if somebody asks me to play in a charity thing, then I'm happy to do that. But after several years seeing the actual play industry change, and it was always a shoestring industry in terms of like, could you make money? Could this actually, be even like a meaningful side hustle to whatever else you're doing? Seeing that change over time, I also same story. I put my energy elsewhere instead, but have a lot of like very fond creative memories from that time. Just like we were talking about Muds, it's very similar to that. A
yeah.
lot of fun creative memories from that. But I just as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at figuring out where to put my time and energy.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, yeah, what am I? Yeah, absolutely. God, that's so important, especially like if you're working on something as like a side hustle or something, and like you're trying to build something or like you're working on something. Where are you investing your time, and is it going to result in something that you're proud of and something that you enjoyed? If you don't enjoy the process, then don't do it, I think. But for me, obviously, I love programming, I love writing, and I love game design. So it's like I'm okay with doing that, and I'm okay with like spending the extra hours doing it. But like some people are doing shit that they really don't enjoy because they think there's some carrot that they're gonna get. You're not gonna get it. Like it's not gonna happen because like if you I don't know, some people are fooling themselves. And part of that also with actual plays was me looking in the mirror and being like, am I going to be able to at some point like I'm not saying I would compete with Three Black Halflings, I'm just using them as an example because I had like direct play experience with them. But like I thought about it like more and more, especially after I went on their show and I had taken a break from actual plays and I was just like, these people are working so hard and they are such great performers. Like, how am I like going to be more than just like the guest that comes in once in a while? Because I looked at it like very seriously and I was like, these are professional actors that did tour, they were on theater, they have professional training and stuff. I have a high school theater background. So I'm like good as a professional GM. Obviously, I'm successful because of the community I built and like, running a great game and you don't have to be that high level, but like there's a ton of professional actors as well in the AP scene and I'm just like I know that at the end of the day, I'm not going to compete with that. That's a reality for me. I know that.
There's so many. I mean, I could talk about acting in that industry for a long time, but I'll say that like in the theater, there are a ton of incredibly talented people, well-trained people who went to school for it that I've known. And if they don't live in the right place, or they don't know the right people, or maybe, if like for me, I know that like I didn't necessarily have financial cushion when I was younger that benefits being an actor, not needing to work so that you can still take classes and can audition as much as possible in between jobs, and that sort of thing, then a lot of talent kind of goes unused. And most of the people that I know who did professional theater have moved on to other industries. I do think a theater background, whether it's high school or college, serves pretty much like any job you ever have in life really well. I think there's just great things that you can take from it and apply to other things. But it's a very difficult industry, and a lot of talented people, moved on, and that's why I think things like actual plays draw actors so much, is because they can have a meaningful storytelling, improvisational acting experience from home. If they're not working in a studio with people that they don't know, and about something that they're passionate for. So I think that's definitely why it attracts those people. But at the top end, though, the people who are really the small number of people who are able to build a huge community and get a sizable audience and make a living off of it. A lot of those people are living in LA, and they have
Hmm.
connections, to film, television industry. They have access to studios, and they also understand the business of how to create a studio, which is
Yeah.
really, really important. And all of
Yeah.
those things, I think, give them an advantage in a very small, there's only so much money to go around. And so those people are going to be able to take the most advantage of that small amount of money. But for most people, it's not a financially sustainable.
Yeah. Definitely. 100%. Signed off, stamped, approved. Listen to Jonathan Frye. Don't get into APs for money because it's not there. It's just
Yeah.
not there. There's no money in it. There's like at some point. Here's the reality. APs then is like to think about this from a business standpoint. It's like a bubble. Like because there's at some point in the line of like where the money changes hands, someone's taken a huge loss, and that's like the only way to look at it because it's like okay, actual play people should be paid fairly, and I have all these people that like myself, of course, like that want to pay people fairly, and I think that's great. But like at the same time, it's like I ran like a 2 session thing on like Vineyard as just a test thing, just to test the group. Loved the group. Really want to play with them, like, and really want to run this story. But I'm like at the same time, I'm like running the numbers, and I'm like, I'm gonna spend about $4,000 or $5,000 on this, and is this gonna push books more than PPCs? Probably not. So I was just like, no, I'm not doing this. So
Yeah.
maybe like down the road, maybe next year or something like that when I have additional capital. But like for most people, it just doesn't make sense. So it's like I don't
Um,
know.
and, and for a lot of the groups that are great and they've built a great community, they've got a very successful actual play, company, within that industry. A lot like you're talking about like Critical Role or Dimension
Hmm.
20, their financial stability, isn't just what they make off of their actual play. Like Dimension 20 has Dropout, which is their own app, and that has other content, and the actual play feeds into that app, and they've got other ways to make money, and they come from College Humor, so that group is very experienced in producing content like that at a high level. And Critical Role has grown to the point where they have their own game publishing wing, and they're out there putting out cartoons on Amazon.
Yeah.
And those are outliers, and I can't, because who knows where the actual money comes and goes from. I certainly don't, but I have to imagine that like most of the money that they're bringing in isn't coming from their actual play, not in a direct way.
Yeah. I would that's why Critical Role sells merch. Like because merch makes money, whereas actual play probably not as much. And like the subs on Twitch don't cover their bills. They shoot in LA. That probably barely covers rent. Like that probably like whatever they make their million, everybody freaked out about their million or whatever. Like you're talking about a full studio. Like you
Hmm.
think that is cheap in LA? No, that's and then they have a full crew. Like, come on, that's a full crew that needs salaries and benefits. Like,
Yeah, it's a
uh,
massive endeavor.
yeah, even though it's quote unquote small for a studio, it's still a fucking studio. So it's like you're talking about comparing like when you're thinking about studio normally, like you're thinking about film or something, you're thinking about like a 50 to 100 million dollars, right? Just to even be talking about making a movie. So it's like, yeah, I don't know, and that's only for like a few months of work or however long it takes to shoot a movie, depending on what it is. But like, oh gosh. Anyway, Donathan, this has been amazing. We've run out the time. I have to go back to my job. I have to
Of
run games.
course.
Finally.
Same.
This has been wonderful. Um, you can find Donathan at donathanfrye.com. And I got the link in the show notes to that and some other things that Donathan has done. Donathan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
Uh,
you so much for having me.
yeah, this has really been wonderful. This did not disappoint because I'm not gonna say that I built you up in my mind. I did a little bit because
I'm glad that you.
two of my friends really like you. So I'm just like,
Oh,
oh gosh, I don't know. Is Donathan gonna be a disappointment? But you weren't, so it's all good.
I'm glad. And we both played Atonement in Muds. That's wild.
It is. It is. All right, thanks everyone. Hi, thanks for listening. If you want to support me, you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/isfriday, or you can find some of the work that I'm doing at vineyardrpg.com if you want to pre-order the book that we made. Thanks.